Love one another just as I have loved you. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples. See you. Tonight, we continue our journey with Jesus, and things are getting a bit tense. But the Jesus of John's Gospel is neither cowering in fear, nor planning a great heroic gesture. In fact, quite the opposite. He's focused on a small act of love. Jesus and his disciples are gathered for dinner. He gets up, takes off his robe, tosses it across a chair, takes a towel off the shelf, slides over a basin of water. He kneels down on a cold and dusty floor and begins to wash his disciples' feet. It doesn't take long before Peter voices an objection. Lord, are you going to wash my feet? The lectionary reading then goes on to describe further parts of Peter's argumentation, which we don't need to rehash, but suffice to say, he is not happy with this arrangement. And why would he be? Earlier in the story, Peter said to Jesus, "We have come to believe and know that you are the Holy One of God." And now look at it, acting anything but holy. Ford Madox Brown, a mid-19th century British artist, painted the scene of Jesus washing Peter's feet with an unforgettable look on Peter's face. Jesus is kneeling, holding Peter's feet with a towel, and Peter's arms are folded, and his chin is on his chest, and he's looking at Jesus as if to say, "I'll let you do it, but I'm not going to like it." Brown's image displays Peter in all of his discomfort at having the Holy One of God touch his dirty feet. He seems to be having vicarious embarrassment as he watches Jesus embarrass himself. But it also might be the case that for Peter, things were starting to come unraveled. If Jesus is the Holy One of God, then he would not be washing my feet. But Jesus is washing my feet, therefore he must not be the Holy One of God. The logic seems pretty sound, but the conclusion is one that Peter is not ready for. His nascent Christology is falling apart. That's right. You can almost hear the fear beneath the bluster. Please, Jesus, don't prove us wrong. After the foot washing and the meal, Jesus makes a statement that frankly sounds a little bit suspect. Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Now I can only imagine what was going through Peter's mind. Peter knows what glory looks like. He's read his Torah. It looks like Moses saying to God, "Show me your glory." And God saying, "I will. I'll make all of my goodness pass before you, but you cannot see my face, for no one shall see me and live." And so God shows Moses a place over by the rock where he can stand. And God says, "While my glory passes by, I'll put you in the cleft of the rock, and I'll cover my hand over your face until I pass by. And then I'll take away my hand, and then you'll see my back, but my face shall never be seen." Now that's glory. That is a glory that is too bright, too real, too powerful, and too much. Like staring into the sun, it can't be seen without a price to be paid. Washing feet is not a glorious act. But Jesus is trying to teach Peter and us something else. So Jesus follows up his words about glory with words about love. "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also shall love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The lowliness of foot washing and the elevation of divine glory come together in acts of love. Holiness is not to be set apart and unreachable, but to be set in the midst of everyday life in order to transform it with acts of love. Jesus says that this is a new commandment that he gives. But it sounds a lot like Leviticus 19:18. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. So we might rightly ask, what's new here, Jesus? And perhaps what is new is that Jesus says, love one another as I have loved you. And so this foot-washing Jesus is calling us to these small acts of generosity and gift. Or perhaps what is new is that Jesus says, love one another. This is something very specific. It's not loving your neighbor in the abstract. It's loving the person sitting next to you. Yes, God wants us to love expansively. But sometimes the bigger challenge is to love particularly, to love those closest to us. Sometimes it's easier to love the world than to love your annoying classmate. Easier to love virtually than to love in real life. Easier to love your hypothetical neighbor than it is to love your own household. Because it's hard to love the parent who, as they've gotten older, has developed a mean streak you never knew they had. It's hard to love a friend when they know you are going through a hard time and they never check in. It's hard to love a child who, in classic teenager form, tells you they hate you. It's hard to love a spouse who takes all the covers at night. And then in the morning says, oh, you must have just pushed them over my right. That's what happened in my household. It's hard to love the church leader who scolds your child for letting the cross droop during the procession. Sometimes it's hardest to love those closest to us, because when they disappoint or hurt us, it stings all the more. Love one another, Jesus says to that room full of disciples, just as I have loved you. And then he adds, by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples. This is how we make Jesus known in the world. This is evangelism. We can do all kinds of good works. We can serve those in need. We can support the right legislation. We can work to restore wetlands. We can do so many good things. But if we don't have love for one another, the world will never know that we are Jesus' disciples. When I was in graduate school, Stanley Hauerwas had a poster on his office door that I saw many times. It was a poster put up on the Mennonite church, and it read, a modest proposal for peace. Let the Christians of the world agree that they will not kill each other. It's modest. But it's so hard to imagine that we can do it. Everyone will know we are disciples if we love one another, but sometimes loving one another turns out to be just another form of loving our enemies. There's a passage in Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov in which Father Zosima, the wise elder, says this about love. He says, never be frightened at your own faint-heartedness in attaining love. Don't be frightened overmuch even at your evil actions. I'm sorry I can say nothing more consoling to you. For love in action is a harsh and dreadful thing compared with love in dreams. Love in dreams is greed for immediate action, rapidly performed and in the sight of all. Men will even give their lives, if only the ordeal does not last long, but is soon over, with all looking on and applauding as though on the stage. But active love is labor and fortitude. But I predict that just when you see with horror that in spite of all your efforts you are getting farther from your goal instead of nearer it, at that very moment I predict that you will reach it and behold clearly the miraculous power of the Lord who has been all the time lovingly and mysteriously guiding you. It's harder than we might think, loving one another. It is labor and it is fortitude. But it doesn't simply have to arise out of our own strength of will or our own fine-tuned virtues. We are able to love because Jesus first loved us. We wash each other's feet because Jesus washes ours. The love that is the glory of God is not heroic but ordinary, not celebrated but humble, not expansive and abstract but localized and particular. As we wash each other's feet, we participate in the localized, particular love by enacting the flow of love's reciprocity. Each of us, the washer and the washed, the giver and the receiver. In small acts such as this, everyone will know we are Jesus' disciples. Amen.